I was wondering if I could sort of follow on from what you were saying, Bob. I used to go in comics shops a lot. In the 70s it was really weird because it was all pornography and then it was on the top shelf.
I never looked up that before.
Well, I sort of would look up to see if there was anything interesting, but then you would see pornography, kind of put you off. And then Traveling Man and Forbidden Planet came along, and a lot of the small indie comics shops disappeared, which is a shame. I used to love them, even though they were a bit weird. And recently I went into Traveling Man, and it was one of the most depressing experiences I had ever had, because the comics were really put into a corner, and the rest was all sort of figures and merchandise.
I'm not so
And I thought, what is the point of calling this a comics shop? However, I edit the journal of graphic novels and comics. Now we started out, comic studies has really grown an area in our team. We started out 2 issues a year in 2009, and we're now at 6 issues a year, and they're like that thick now, because Routledge have increased the word count, they've increased the page count, and we have a minimum of 10 articles per issue. That is how big it's become. It's like telephone now. But there's a very interesting trend in the sorts of things people are looking at now. In 2010, 70% of the articles were about things like superheroes. And now we've got something like 15% about superheroes. And some of the main things coming up are eco-comics, a lot of stuff from India, and the South Asian comics. There's a lot of stuff about indie comics. So you're not alone, that's what I'm saying. There's Canadian comics are really great. They have small presses. There's still small presses in America. So don't feel you're by yourself. And you know, BD is a huge thing in Europe. And we get the odd manga thing, but I think it's manga journals, so we don't get as much as we would think. But what you could do, and I've been sort of sneakily taking pictures of your comics stuff for the covers of the magazines, which I'm hoping will agree that I could use on the cover of the journal. But if anyone wanted to write a little article about comics in Northern Ireland, you know, you could do that. That would be promoted to the conference. And we also do a conference every year. This year it's in Brussels. It's about taste this year, which Julia was going to do something on comics and taste and cookery and girls' comics. But we do have other stuff, like it's a little stuff about cannibalism and comics in South Asia. And some great stuff has been pushed in. And you know, you were talking about a lot of people coming to the comics shops to look for old comics. There's very few historical articles written for the journal. A lot of them are about contemporary comics. So if anyone wants a copy of the journal, I'll try and get them a copy. Or you know, your university library might have copies of the journal. But we are not the only journal.
Where is this available from, or what circulation?
You can get it from Routledge, the publishers. It's enormously expensive.
Right.
But you can also get it from university libraries, because what they do is they do like a basket of stuff. So it can come in a basket of stuff like humanities journals. But Routledge publish ours, Intellect publish studies and comics that Julia is one of the editors for. Then there's comic studies in America. and that's the Leuven Press in Brussels. And then there's another one, Inks in America. But there's been an explosion of comics journals for academics, and from what I've gathered, most of them are doing stuff that is contemporary comics. You know, I mean, there's historical articles. But I think it's a far more exciting scene than you would imagine.
Well, I didn't have any view of that until, I think it was 2 years ago, I knew 3 of the journals were down in tubes, including your own, and at that point was very interested in them, but then looked at the price to subscribe, and without having access to a university library, as a non-graduate of anything, that makes it difficult. So if there would be some way in which, some scheme which would allow people involved in comics to access university libraries in that way, that would help us a lot. And I think all of us here would be very interested in putting our 2 pence worth. You've seen what we did with unknown journals, right?
Yeah.
That's because we're interested in hearing what other people think about comics, and we'd love to cross-pollinate it, as it were.
If you could write an article, you know, like a joint article about what you're doing,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
contemporaries. I mean, I couldn't guarantee publication because you have to go through planning peer review processes. But I think that would be really interesting. And also you would get online access to the article. And if anyone wants a copy of the journal, I've got loads of copies of the journal, I'm trying to put somewhere. I never thought through, obviously. But, you know, stamps commuting from Northern Ireland and all that, then I'll send you a copy of the journal.
Yeah.
No, just off both of those points, I know Peter, you had mentioned the plans to reprint some older work, like Lady Francis and all that. I feel like you could take, for example, with that, you could take all of these approaches where you could get immediate contact. I feel like that's the kind of thing that a story can be spun about.
Oh, did you know there's old college?
Yeah.
You know that?
You know, amazing. And you can, there's as you were saying, there's a need for historical perspectives and that. Here's the history as well as what's going on contemporary. I feel like there are different ways that you could promote something like that if you get that kind of a hook.
Picking up again on something else you mentioned about comic shops becoming depressing and BD becoming very interesting. Comic shops seem to be becoming a bit of a ghetto for certain genres. And so, for example, if you go into a comic shop, you won't see Reno. No, you won't see any of the history comics. You very rarely see the fantastic range of comics that are coming out from all the publishers that are done in little strange formats. What you see is American comics and comics in that genre, and that readership is shrinking. So if we want comics to survive, we need to bring in all different readers, different genres, and the best place to look, as far as I can see, is BD. If you look at the French comics, the variation in genre and the sheer quality of some of them that are not written for kids. I love superhero comics, but I think they're written for 50-year-old adolescents. There are comics that are written for grown-ups in France that if we manage to get them in front of people would absolutely make a huge difference.